Hey listener, welcome. I'm glad you could join me tonight. I'm your storyteller, and I'll be your companion as you drift off to sleep. Or perhaps as you lie there wide awake, listening to this story, unsure if you'll ever fall asleep again. I want to ask you something before I start. Have you ever heard a voice that you knew, somehow, in your gut, in the part of your brain that hasn't changed since we were living in caves, that you knew shouldn't exist? Not a ghost, not a demon, just a voice. A woman's voice, calm and desperate at the same time, asking for help from a place that isn't there anymore. That's what this is about. I'm not the kind of person who tells stories like this. I'm not dramatic. I'm not online much. I drive trucks for a living, have for almost 18 years now, and if you know anything about long-haul driving, you know that the job attracts a certain type. Quiet people, people who are comfortable with silence, people who don't need a lot of noise around them to feel okay. That's me. My name is Dale. I'm 44 years old, I live outside of Whitehorse, and I have a dog named Biscuit who is the greatest creature on the planet. That's my life. That's been my life for a long time. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand who I am before I tell you what happened. I need you to know I'm not someone who chases ghost stories. I'm not someone who reads too much into things. I drive. I listen to the radio. I drink bad coffee and I watch the road and I come home to my dog. That's it. That's the whole resume. So when I tell you what happened on the Klondike Highway on a Tuesday night in early February, I need you to believe me when I say I have no explanation for it. None. I've turned it over in my head for 2 years. I've talked to one person about it, a guy named Pete who I've driven with for almost a decade, and even he went quiet after I finished. Just sat there with his coffee mug halfway to his mouth and didn't say anything for almost a full minute. That's the reaction I'm expecting from you too. Underscore 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 underscore. The run itself was nothing special. I was hauling equipment up toward Dawson City, generator parts, mostly some industrial supply stuff for a mining operation that was gearing up for spring. February in the Yukon is its own kind of brutal. You've probably seen pictures. The cold there isn't like cold anywhere else. It has weight to it. It presses against the windows. At minus 35, even a fully heated cab starts to feel like it's just delaying the inevitable. The highway narrows in places. The trees crowd in on both sides, black and bare. And at night, with no moon, the only thing that exists in the world is the cone of your headlights and whatever they happen to hit. I'd done this route probably 60, 70 times. I knew the gas stops. I knew the dead zones where the radio cuts out, the stretches where the road ices up if the temperature swings. I had my thermos of coffee, a bag of beef jerky, and an audiobook going, some crime thriller I barely remember now because of what happened about 3 hours in. The audiobook cut out. That happens. Bluetooth hiccups, the app glitches, whatever. I reached over to restart it, and when I looked back at the radio display, it was scanning. Not because I'd hit anything, just scanning on its own, cycling through frequencies like someone was turning the dial. I figured it was interference. Could be anything out there. Weather stations, mining operations, sometimes the military runs exercises in the Northern Territories. I left it alone and waited for it to settle. It settled on a frequency, and I heard her. Underscore 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 underscore. Static first, the kind that sounds like a fire burning somewhere far away, and then under it a voice, a woman. She sounded maybe 30, maybe a little older. She wasn't screaming. That's the thing I keep coming back to. She wasn't hysterical. She was speaking in that very particular way that people speak when they've been afraid for so long that they've gone past panic and come out the other side into something quieter and more terrible. She said, "If anyone can hear this, I need help. We've broken down on the highway. We're near the Sulphur Creek Junction. There are 3 of us. It's very cold. Please, if anyone hears this, please." And then more static. And then it again like a loop, like a recording. Same words, same voice, same exact pauses between the sentences. I picked up my CB and tried to reach her. Standard procedure. "This is eastbound freight. I copy you. What's your position?" Nothing. I tried 3 more times. Nothing but static. I tried the emergency channel. Nothing. Now here's where I made the decision that I still ask myself about. I should have called it in to the highway authority and kept driving. That's what I should have done. But the thing is, I'm a human being, and there was a woman on a radio saying she was stranded in minus 35-degree cold with 2 other people. You don't drive past that. You can't. At least I couldn't. So I started paying attention to the highway markers, trying to figure out how far I was from the Sulphur Creek Junction. And that's when it got strange. Underscore 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 underscore. Because I knew the Sulphur Creek Junction. I'd driven past the sign for it probably 50 times. It's just a marker, really. There's nothing there. An old pull-off, maybe the remnant of a road that goes nowhere now. No services, no buildings, nothing. Just a name on a sign. But as I drove, I noticed the road was changing. Not dramatically at first. Just little things. The tree line seemed further back than I remembered. There was what looked like a gravel road on the left side that I didn't think had been there before. But at night, tired, it's easy to miss things. I told myself that. Then I saw a light. A light in the distance, off to the left. Warm light. Yellow. Like the kind that comes from a window. And I thought, okay, that must be a ranger station, maybe a maintenance building I'd never noticed before. The highway authority has little outpost buildings scattered around, heated equipment storage, that kind of thing. I figured maybe someone had parked there. Maybe that's where the stranded vehicle was. I pulled over. I got out. The cold hit me like a wall. Instantly. The kind of cold that makes your nose hairs freeze and your eyes ache. I had my heavy gear on, but I could feel it through everything. I stood beside the truck and listened. Quiet. That deep, mineral quiet that you only get in winter wilderness. No wind. No animals. Just the ticking of my engine cooling down. And then I heard it again. The voice. Not from the radio this time. From somewhere ahead of me, out toward the light. That same flat, exhausted tone. Please. If anyone can hear this. I started walking toward it. I want to slow down here because this is the part I've gone over more times than I can count. And I want to get it right. The light was coming from a building. A real building, not a storage shed. Small, maybe the size of a large living room. Wood construction, with what looked like a covered porch. There was smoke coming from a chimney pipe. There was a truck parked in front of it, older model, maybe a late 70s pickup, and the hood was up. And there was a woman standing on the porch. She was looking at me. And here's the thing. I wasn't scared exactly. I was confused, which is a different thing. Because the building looked, I want to be careful with this word, it looked settled. Old. Like it had been there for a long time. There was a worn path from the road to the front door. There was a rusted metal sign above the porch that I couldn't quite read from where I stood. I walked up to her. She was maybe in her mid-30s, dark hair, wearing a heavy coat that looked like it was from a different era. The kind you see in photos from the 70s, that particular cut and color. She was watching me with an expression that I can only describe as relieved. Like she'd been waiting. I said, "Ma'am, are you okay? I heard your call on the radio." She looked at me for a second and said, "You actually came." Not surprised. More like grateful. Quietly grateful in a way that made my chest do something uncomfortable. I said, "Where are you headed? What happened to your truck?" She said, "It just stopped. About an hour ago. The engine just stopped. We've been waiting." She paused. "We've been waiting a long time." I looked at the truck again. The tires. The model. Something about all of it was sitting wrong in my brain, but I couldn't catch it. The way you can't catch a word that's on the tip of your tongue. I said, "Is there anyone else with you?" She nodded. "Inside. 2 others. They're very cold." I said I had emergency supplies in the truck, that I could radio for help once we got back to the road, that I could take them into the next town. And she smiled at me, and I don't know how to describe this without sounding like I'm exaggerating, but it was the saddest smile I have ever seen on a human face. Not scared, not happy, just sad, deeply, endlessly sad. She said, "You should go back. You shouldn't come inside." I stopped. She said it again quietly. "You should go back to your truck and keep driving. Don't stop again tonight. Will you do that?" I just stood there for a second. My brain was doing something, that threat assessment thing that happens before your conscious mind catches up. My heart rate had shifted. My hands were starting to tingle. I said, "Ma'am, I can't just leave you here." She said, "I know, but you need to." And then she looked down the road, away from me, away from her truck, just down the dark highway, and her face changed. The sadness was still there, but something else came into it. Something careful. She said very quietly, like she didn't want to be overheard, "Please, just go. Take the road back the way you came. Don't follow the signs to the junction. Promise me." I went back to the truck. I don't fully know why. Something in my body moved before my mind agreed. I walked back to the cab, climbed in, sat down. My hands were shaking. I looked in the side mirror at the building. It was still there. The light in the window. The smoke from the chimney. I reached for my CB and called it in. Gave the location as best I could. Described the building, the woman, the truck. The dispatcher on the other end went quiet for a beat too long, and then she said, "Sir, what was your exact milepost when you pulled over?" I told her. Another pause. She said, "Can you describe the building again?" I did. She said, "Sir, there are no structures at that location. There haven't been since." And she paused again, like she was reading something. "Since 1984. There was a way station there, but it burned in '83. There's nothing there now." I looked in the mirror. The building was still there. I said, "I'm looking at it right now." She said, "I'm going to send a highway patrol unit to your location. Please stay in your vehicle." I stayed in my vehicle. I watched the mirror, and very slowly, and I mean over the course of maybe 4 or 5 minutes, which is somehow worse than if it had happened all at once, the light in the window faded. Not like someone turned it off, like it was being absorbed. The building didn't disappear exactly. It just became less certain. The edges of it softened, and then the darkness around it moved in, and it was gone. The truck was still there. The old pickup, hood up, parked where it had been. Except when the patrol unit arrived 20 minutes later, and 2 officers walked that ground with flashlights, they found nothing. No building. No truck. No tire tracks. No footprints. Just snow. Undisturbed snow. Underscore 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 underscore. One of the officers, a woman named Reyes, sat with me in the cab for a while. She didn't dismiss me. I appreciated that. She asked me to describe everything again slowly, and she wrote it down, and she didn't tell me I was tired or imagining things. When I mentioned the name on the sign above the porch, which I'd finally made out in the last moment before the building faded, 2 words that I'd read without really processing, Sulphur Creek, she stopped writing for a second. She said, "You know there was a way station by that name." I said I'd heard there was something there years ago. She said, "It burned in February 1983. 3 people died. They were stranded in their vehicle. Their truck broke down, and they took shelter in the way station while they waited for help. There was a fire in the wood stove. They didn't make it out." I didn't say anything. She said, "The woman who ran the radio. Her name was Margaret. She'd gotten a distress signal out before the fire got bad." I still didn't say anything. She looked at me. The signal was received, but nobody came in time. Underscore 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 underscore. I drove the rest of that route in almost total silence. No audiobook, no radio, just the road and the headlights and the dark trees pressing in. I've thought about it for 2 years. I've tried to find the rational explanation, and I've come close a few times. Brain playing tricks in the cold, hypnagogia, some kind of atmospheric radio anomaly bouncing a 40-year-old signal off the ionosphere, sleep deprivation doing something to my visual processing. I've tried all of those doors. They don't fully close. What I keep coming back to is this. She told me to go. She didn't want me inside. She'd been waiting. She said it herself. We've been waiting a long time. And when someone finally came, she sent him away. Because whatever was inside that building, whatever that place was or is, she didn't want to be the reason someone else stayed in it. That's the part that stays with me. Not the fear. The mercy of it. 40 years of waiting in the cold, and when someone finally shows up, she protects him instead of herself. I don't know what that means. I don't know if it means anything. But I drove back past that milepost last spring, in daylight, with Biscuit in the passenger seat, and I pulled over, and I stood where the building had been. Nothing there. Just a flat patch of snow, some scrub brush, the tree line. I stood there for a long time. I didn't say anything out loud, but in my head I said something. I said thank you, for the warning, for sending me back. And I got back in the truck, and I drove, and I didn't look in the mirror. Underscore 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 underscore. I don't tell this to scare you. I know that's a weird thing to say at the end of a story like this, but it's true. I tell it because I think about Margaret sometimes, and the other 2 people who were with her, and the fact that someone tried to reach them and didn't make it in time. And I think about how that might echo somehow, how a moment that awful might leave a mark on a place. Not a curse, not a haunting in the movie sense, just a mark, a memory in the geography. And I think about her face, that sad, tired, certain face, and the way she said you should go back like she'd maybe said it before, to others, across 40 years of February nights. Maybe I wasn't the first person to hear that signal. Maybe I won't be the last. If you ever drive the Klondike Highway, and God, it's a beautiful road, I want you to know that it really is. If you ever drive it in winter and your radio starts scanning on its own, and you pick up a woman's voice asking for help near the Sulphur Creek Junction, keep driving. Not because she means you harm. She doesn't. But because that place is hers now. And she spent 40 years trying to make sure no one else gets stuck in it. Honor that. Underscore 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 underscore. Stay safe out there. And if something feels wrong, even if you can't explain it, even if it makes no rational sense, sometimes the best thing you can do is listen to the quiet part of yourself that knows. Good night. Story 2. Have you ever heard a sound and just known, not suspected, not wondered, but known in your bones that something was wrong? Not the kind of wrong you can explain to someone else. Not the kind where you can pull out your phone and show them evidence. Just that deep, animal thing that wakes up in your chest and tells you to be very, very still. I felt that for the first time in my life on a Thursday night in February, lying in a sleeping bag on the frozen shore of Lake Superior, listening to something move beneath 12 inches of ice. I was 23 years old. I thought I understood fear. I didn't understand anything. Underscore 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 underscore. My name is Daniel. Danny to most people who know me. At the time of this story, I was living in Duluth, Minnesota, which, if you've never been, is the kind of city that sits at the very western tip of Lake Superior and basically exists in defiance of the cold. We're talking serious cold. The kind where your car doesn't start, where the inside of your nose freezes the second you step outside, where locals have this particular brand of dark humor about weather that outsiders just don't get. I grew up there, so did my best friend Marcus. We'd gone to the same high school, played on the same hockey team, and somehow still ended up within 15 minutes of each other as adults. Marcus was a mechanic. I was doing data entry for a logistics company, which sounds exactly as boring as it was. We were both the kind of guys who needed adventure, but could never afford much of one. That February, Marcus had this idea. He'd been dating a girl named Priya for about 8 months, and she had a friend named Sam, short for Samantha, who was allegedly perfect for me. Marcus had been saying this for weeks. I'd been saying, yeah, sure, and not meaning it. But then Marcus proposed a camping trip, ice camping specifically, out near the Apostle Islands area up on the lake, and suddenly everyone was in, and I was outvoted. For people, 2 tents, 3 days on a frozen lake. I want to be honest with you. At first, I thought it was going to be the best weekend of my young adult life. Underscore 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 Underscore, 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 underscore. We left on a Wednesday morning. The four of us crammed into Marcus's truck with a cooler, for sleeping bags rated to -20, a propane burner, and more snacks than any of us could eat in a month. Priya had made a playlist. Sam was already funny within the first 10 minutes of the drive. I remember thinking, okay, maybe Marcus was right about her. Maybe this is going to be good. The drive north took about 2.5 hours. The further we got from Duluth, the more the world simplified: trees, snow, highway, sky. By the time we turned off toward the lake access point Marcus had found on some obscure winter camping forum, the sun was already getting low, and everything had that orange-pink light that makes January in the north look almost beautiful. We set up camp maybe 30 yards from the shoreline. I say shore, but honestly, at that point the ice extended so far out that the distinction between lake and land was mostly just about the trees stopping. The ice was thick. People had been driving their fishing trucks out on it all season, and it creaked and groaned in the way that experienced ice campers apparently find normal. We'd been warned about that. Marcus had done his research. Ice talks, he'd told us on the drive up. It makes noise when it expands and contracts. It's just physics. Don't freak out. I filed that away. I really wish I'd paid more attention to it. That first night was perfect. We built a fire in a metal ring Marcus had hauled out, cooked brats, drank beer that got cold faster than we wanted it to, and stayed up until midnight just talking. Sam told this story about getting lost in Costa Rica that had all of us crying with laughter. Marcus did his impression of our high school hockey coach that literally never gets old. Priya, who was an ER nurse, told us about the strangest thing she'd ever seen come through the hospital, which I won't repeat here because this story is already going to be disturbing enough. We turned in around 12:30. Marcus and Priya in one tent, Sam and I in the other, which was either very deliberate or the most convenient coincidence of Marcus's life. I fell asleep fast. That cold air will do it to you. Underscore, 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 underscore. I woke up at 2:47 a.m. I know the exact time because I checked my phone when I heard it. At first I thought it was just the ice, that groaning, cracking sound that Marcus had described. I lay there for a second, half asleep, and told myself exactly that. It's just the ice. It's just physics. But then I heard it again, and something about it was different. The ice sounds I'd heard earlier in the evening were random, spontaneous. They'd pop up from different directions, travel across the lake in these long, almost musical tones. This sound was different. It was rhythmic, slow and deliberate, like something moving. A heavy, dragging kind of pressure from below, working its way in one direction, toward the shore. I sat up in my sleeping bag. Sam was breathing slowly beside me, still asleep. I unzipped just far enough to look out the tent flap. The lake was silver under a half moon, absolutely still on the surface. No wind, no animals, nothing, but I could still hear it. Under the ice, maybe 40 or 50 yards out, that slow, grinding movement. I told myself it was a fish. I told myself it was a current. I told myself that Marcus had said the ice talks and that I needed to go back to sleep because I had to drive home in 2 days and I was being ridiculous. I lay back down. The sound stopped. I almost convinced myself I'd dreamed it, but I was awake for another 40 minutes before I fell back asleep, and the whole time, I kept waiting for it to come back. It didn't. Not that night. Underscore, 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 underscore. Thursday was beautiful. Genuinely beautiful. We went ice fishing, which I had never done before in my life, and turns out involves a lot of sitting very still and waiting and being cold, but also there's something meditative about it. Sam caught a decent-sized perch and was more excited than I think I've ever seen anyone be about a fish. Marcus fell through a soft patch up to his knee and spent 20 minutes swearing about it. Priya took approximately 400 photos. I didn't mention what I'd heard the night before. I almost brought it up a couple times, but every time I started to say something, I thought about how it would sound, and I didn't want to be the guy who ruined the weekend with a story about mysterious ice noises. So I kept it to myself. That was a mistake. I know that now. Thursday night, We ate well, drank a little less than the night before, and Marcus and I sat by the fire after the girls had gone to bed. We were just talking, nothing serious, but at some point the conversation drifted toward the lake, and Marcus mentioned that the forum he'd found the spot on had a few old posts about it. What kind of posts? I asked. He kind of shrugged. You know, local stuff. Old Ojibwe stories about the lake. People posting about weird sounds at night, fish behavior being off. One guy said his dog refused to go near the water. When was this? I don't know. A few years ago, I think. But they're all over the place, those kinds of stories. Every lake's got them. He poked the fire. Just superstition, you know. I nodded. Didn't say anything about what I'd heard. We turned in around 11. I lay there in the dark next to Sam, who was already asleep, and I stared at the ceiling of the tent, and I thought about the sound. About the way it had moved. Slow. Purposeful. I fell asleep eventually. I don't know what time. Underscore 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 underscore. At 1:15 a.m., I woke up again. And this time it was louder. Not just louder. Closer. It was coming from right beneath us, or close to it, that grinding, dragging pressure, like something enormous working its way across the underside of the ice with tremendous patience. Like it had all the time in the world. I sat up. Sam was still asleep. I could see from the slight change in the shadows that there was moonlight outside, decent visibility. Then I heard something else. A crack. Not the long, traveling tone of settling ice. A short, sharp crack, like something hitting the underside from below. Then another one. And another. I shook Sam's shoulder. Hey, wake up. She groaned. What? Do you hear that? Silence. Then her breathing changed. She'd heard it. What is that? She whispered. I don't know. We sat there for a moment. The cracking had stopped, but that grinding, pressured movement was still there, working its way slowly, methodically toward the shore. I unzipped the tent flap as quietly as I could and looked out. The lake was still. Moonlit. Beautiful. But there was a crack in the ice. I could see it from where I crouched, a jagged dark line maybe 20-25 yards from shore, running roughly parallel to the bank. It hadn't been there yesterday. I'm going to wake Marcus, I said. Sam grabbed my arm. Don't go out there. I'm just going to the next tent. Danny. Her voice was very quiet. Don't go out there. I looked at her. She was staring past me at the lake, and her face had gone very still in that way that people's faces go when they are trying very hard not to show that they are scared. I looked back at the lake. Something was moving under the ice. I don't mean I heard it. I mean I could see it. Beneath the surface, in the moonlight, there was a shadow, large, much too large, moving slowly from the crack toward the shore. Not like a fish. Not like a current. Moving the way something moves when it has direction and intention. I will tell you honestly, I do not know what I saw. I do not know to this day what was under that ice. There are things that live in Lake Superior, massive lake sturgeon, some of the oldest individual animals on the continent, that can reach 7 feet and more, that have been there since before your great-grandparents were born. The lake is cold enough and deep enough that it holds things most people have never seen. I told myself it was a sturgeon. I went and woke Marcus. Underscore 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 underscore. He came out of his tent half asleep and annoyed, and I showed him the crack in the ice and tried to explain what I'd seen, and he stood there in the cold looking at the lake for a long moment. Fish, he said finally. Marcus, it was big. Lake Superior is full of big fish, man. This is their lake, we're the guests. Let's go back to sleep. What about the crack? He looked at it. Ice shifts. I told you. You saw the crack form, that's all. The sound is the ice under pressure. He put his hand on my shoulder. Go back to sleep. We're fine. I went back to the tent. Sam looked at me. He thinks it's fish, I said. She looked like she wanted to say something but didn't. We zipped up the tent and lay back down in the dark. The cracking sounds had stopped. The grinding, dragging movement was gone. The lake was silent. I lay there until dawn, and I did not sleep. Underscore 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 underscore. In the morning, Marcus was missing. I want you to understand how that sentence hit us. The way that a perfectly ordinary morning, cold air, coffee smell from the propane burner, Priya singing something quietly outside, can just rupture when you look around and realize that one of the 4 people who should be there isn't. Priya had been up first. She'd started the burner, started the coffee, and assumed Marcus had gone to use the woods. But it had been 20 minutes, and he hadn't come back, and she'd already been to the tree line, and there was no sign of him. His boots were outside their tent. Both of them, side by side in the snow. You don't walk into a Wisconsin February in your socks. You just don't. I ran to the ice. The crack from last night was bigger. It had split open, maybe 6 or 8 inches wide at its widest point, running jagged and dark across the surface. The ice around it was wet, like something heavy had gone in or come out recently. There were no footprints in the snow between the camp and the crack. The snow was undisturbed. I stood at the edge of the ice, and I screamed Marcus's name until my throat hurt. Underscore 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 underscore. I'm going to tell you what the next several hours were. I'm going to be honest, even though it's still hard to talk about. We called 911. They sent a sheriff's deputy from Ashland County, a genuinely kind man named Deputy Harlow, who arrived in about 45 minutes and took everything very seriously. He called in a water rescue team. By early afternoon, there were a dozen people on the ice with gear, and a small dive team had gone under near the crack. They found Marcus about 60 feet from the crack, under the ice. He was alive. I want to let that sit there for a second, because I know what this story felt like it was building toward. He was alive. Barely, hypothermic and close to unconscious, but alive. They pulled him out and got heat on him, and he was airlifted to a hospital in Duluth. He spent 4 days in the ICU, and then 2 weeks in a regular room, and then he came home. He doesn't remember anything after going to sleep Thursday night. There's a gap of hours that is just gone. He doesn't remember waking up, doesn't remember walking to the ice, doesn't remember going in. The doctors called it a parasomnia, a disorder where people can perform complex actions while still technically asleep. Sleepwalking, essentially, triggered possibly by the stress of the environment, the cold, the disrupted sleep. His boots were outside the tent because he'd taken them off before bed. Sleepwalkers often navigate around obstacles. He'd walked barefoot across the snow to the ice and gone through the crack in his sleep. That is the explanation. That is the official medical reasonable explanation, and I believe it because I have to believe it. But here's the part one haven't told anyone. The part one still think about. When the dive team found Marcus, he wasn't just floating under the ice. He was at the edge of the under-ice shelf near the lake floor, in water that shouldn't have been reachable from that crack without moving. The deputy told me later, quietly, while the rescue team was loading Marcus into the helicopter, that the dive team had found something else down there. A trail in the sediment of the lake bottom. Wide. Irregular. Like something had been dragged, or had dragged itself, over a very long distance, leading up from the deep water toward the shallows beneath our camp. He said the dive team lead, a man with 20 years of experience on Superior, had come up from that dive white as a sheet and refused to go back down. Deputy Harlow looked at me when he told me this, and he said, "I'm not going to put that in the report." I asked him why. He said, "Because I don't know what it means, and I don't think you want to know either." Underscore 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 underscore. We drove home the next morning. All 3 of us, me, Priya, and Sam, silent for most of 2.5 hours. The kind of silence that doesn't need to be explained. I went to see Marcus every day in the hospital. By the second week, he was sitting up, making jokes, demanding real food. He looked like himself again. He squeezed my hand when I told him I'd been scared and said, I know, man. I'm sorry. You don't have anything to be sorry about," I said. "I know," he said again. And then quieter. I don't remember it. But sometimes I feel like I almost remember something. Like there was something in the water with me. I didn't say anything. It was probably just the cold, he said. Hypothermia does things to your brain. Makes you hallucinate. Yeah, I said. Probably. He looked at me. Did you hear it? The night before? I looked at him for a long time. Hear what? He turned his head toward the window. Outside was Duluth in winter. Gray sky, black trees, the far silver glint of the lake visible from the hospital's upper floors. Never mind, he said. Forget it. Underscore 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 underscore. It has been 2 years since that trip. Marcus is fine, genuinely fine, as far as I can tell. He got engaged to Priya 6 months ago. I was at the dinner when he proposed, and it was the most normal, joyful thing I'd seen in a long time, and I needed it badly. Sam and I dated for about a year. It didn't work out, but we're still friendly. She never once, in all the time we were together, brought up that night, and I never pushed it. Some things you just agree wordlessly not to open back up. I still live in Duluth. I can see Lake Superior from certain points on my commute. On clear days in winter, it's genuinely one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. This vast, cold, iron-gray expanse that stretches out to the horizon and seems to hold the sky up. I don't go near the frozen parts anymore. I can't explain that to most people in a way that doesn't sound irrational, so I usually don't try. I just stay on the shore. I stay on the land side of where the ice begins. People ask me sometimes, because Marcus tells the story, the cleaned-up version, the medical version about sleepwalking and hypothermia. They ask me if I was scared that weekend. And I say yes. I was terrified when we found him missing, of course I was. And that's true. That was the most scared I've ever been in my life. But when I'm being honest with myself, alone at night, the part that actually stays with me isn't finding his boots in the snow. It isn't seeing that crack in the ice. It's the sound. That slow, patient, grinding movement from beneath the surface of the ice. Moving toward shore. Working toward something. Lake Superior is the largest freshwater lake in the world by surface area. It's over 700 feet deep in places. It has temperatures near the bottom that barely change across seasons. Scientists will tell you that most of it has barely been explored. They'll tell you about the sturgeon, about the strange pressure anomalies, about the shipwrecks that have never been found despite decades of searching. They'll tell you the lake keeps its dead. There's a saying around here, the old sailors used to say it. Superior never gives up her dead. The water is cold enough that the bodies of those who drown never rise to the surface the way they would in warmer water. They stay down there, in the dark. I think about that sometimes. I think about what else might stay down there in the dark, at the bottom of something so vast and cold and old that we haven't even given proper names to most of what lives inside it. I think about that trail in the sediment. That wide, irregular mark dragged up from the deep water toward the shallows. And I think about the sound. That sound. Whatever it was, fish, current, ice shifting, my own fear playing tricks on me in the dark. It knew exactly where we were. It moved toward us with the patience of something that has nowhere to be, nothing but time. And it came back the next night. And the crack was bigger. I don't know what it wanted. I don't know what it was reaching for, if it was reaching for anything at all. I don't know if Marcus went to it, or if it found him. What I know is this. There are places in this world that don't belong to us. Places so large and so old and so cold that we are simply too small to understand what we're walking into when we go there. We pitch our little tents and we make our little fires and we laugh too loud and we forget that some things have been here longer than memory, longer than language, longer than the particular kind of fear that has a name. We went out there in February, for friends, looking for adventure on a frozen lake. Something under that ice had been there longer than our country has existed, longer than the cities on its shores. Longer than the people who first gave it a name and knew enough to stay away. Whatever it was, it let Marcus come home. I try not to think too hard about why. Underscore 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 underscore. Be careful out there. And if you ever hear something moving under the ice, not the random creak of a shifting surface, but something slow and deliberate and patient, Leave. Just leave. Don't wait for the morning. Don't tell yourself it's nothing. Don't be like me. Just go. Story number 3. I want to ask you something before I start. Have you ever been in a place that felt like it was watching you? Not the people in it, not the noise outside, the place itself, the walls, the floorboards, the air sitting too still in corners it shouldn't be sitting in. Because I have, and I don't say that lightly. I'm not someone who spooks easily. I'm not someone who reads into things or jumps at shadows. I'm a project manager. I make spreadsheets for fun. I am, by most definitions, the most boring kind of person you could sit next to on a plane. But something happened to me and my girlfriend last February in a cabin outside Whistler, British Columbia, that I still can't fully explain. And I've tried. God, I've tried. I'm telling this story because I think someone else needs to hear it. Maybe you've stayed somewhere that felt wrong and you talked yourself out of it. Maybe you're planning a trip and you're going to rent some cute little isolated getaway and think, this will be romantic. I'm not here to ruin your vacation. I'm here to tell you to trust the thing in your chest when it tells you to leave. Because we didn't. And I wish every single day that we had. Underscore 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 underscore. My name is Daniel. I was 31 when this happened. My girlfriend, Claire, was 29. We'd been together for almost 4 years at that point. The kind of relationship where you stop performing for each other and just exist, which is both a beautiful thing and also means you sometimes forget to actually prioritize each other. We both worked too much. She was finishing her second year as a nurse at Vancouver General. I was mid-project on a commercial renovation in Burnaby that had already gone 6 weeks over schedule. We were tired. Not bad tired, not falling apart tired, just the specific kind of tired that comes from two people being stretched thin in different directions and meeting at the end of the day with not much left to give. So in January, Claire sent me a link to a cabin rental and just wrote, February long weekend. We need this. She was right. We did need it. The cabin was listed on a pretty standard vacation rental site. It looked gorgeous in the photos, exposed wood beams, a stone fireplace, a clawfoot tub, pine trees pressing right up against the windows. It was called Whistler Pines Retreat, Cabin 13. The listing had a decent rating, something like 4.2 stars, a handful of reviews mostly saying things like cozy, great location, quiet. Nothing alarming. One review mentioned the Wi-Fi was spotty, which honestly we both considered a selling point. We booked it for 3 nights, Friday to Monday. Cost us about $340 a night, which felt steep, but we'd been saving. We told ourselves we deserved it. We drove up Friday afternoon, took the Sea to Sky Highway, windows fogged from the cold, music playing, both of us decompressing for the first time in weeks. By the time we pulled off the main road onto the gravel path leading to the property, it was almost 6 o'clock and the sky had gone that deep blue-gray that comes right before dark in winter. The trees were massive, old-growth Douglas fir, the kind that make you feel small in a way that's usually comforting. The property manager, a guy named Glenn, mid-50s, drove a white truck, met us at the cabin to hand over the keys. He was pleasant enough, a little quiet. He walked us through the basics, with stove instructions, where the spare blankets were. Water pressure was always a bit slow in winter. Cell service was 1 bar on a good day, but there was a landline on the kitchen wall if we needed it. Anyone else staying on the property? I asked, just making conversation. He paused a half-second longer than felt normal. No. The other cabins are closed off-season. Just you two. He left. We brought in our bags. Claire immediately started making a fire, and I opened a bottle of red wine we'd brought, and for the first hour or so everything was exactly what we'd wanted. Warm and quiet and ours. We went to bed around 11. Slept fine. Woke up Saturday morning to snow coming down soft and heavy through the windows, made eggs, read our books. It was perfect. It was Saturday night when I first noticed something wrong. Underscore 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 underscore. We'd had a long afternoon, snow showed on a trail nearby, came back freezing and happy, had dinner, opened a second bottle of wine. Went to bed around midnight. I'm a light sleeper by nature, always have been, so around 2 in the morning I woke up for no real reason, the way I sometimes do, and just lay there staring at the ceiling waiting to drift off again. And then I noticed the clock. There was a small analog clock on the nightstand. Wooden frame, white face. I'd glanced at it when we got into bed, and it had read 11:58. Now, at what felt like 2 in the morning, maybe 2:15, my body clock is usually pretty accurate. The clock read 11:43. I stared at it for a moment. Then I looked at my phone. No cell signal, so no automatic time sync, but my phone read 2:09 a.m. I told myself the clock battery was dying. Old analog clocks do that. They don't stop cleanly, they slow down, they lose time. I turned over and went back to sleep. But in the morning, the clock read 8:14. And my phone read 8:14. So either the battery had sorted itself out, or I'd been wrong about what time I'd woken up, or... I didn't finish that thought. I told Claire about it over coffee, and she laughed a little and said I probably just misread it in the dark. I probably had. I dropped it, except when we came in from a walk that afternoon. The kitchen chairs were different. I want to be careful about how I say this because I know how it sounds. I'm not saying they moved dramatically. I'm not saying they were stacked on the table like a horror movie. I'm saying that when we'd had breakfast that morning, we'd both sat on the same side of the kitchen table, facing the window, looking out at the snow, and I remembered pushing my chair back at an angle when I got up. A small thing. But when we came back from the walk, both chairs were neatly tucked in, parallel, exactly centered under the table. Not pushed in like someone had tidied up, but arranged. Precise in a way that felt deliberate. Did you do that before we left? I asked Claire. She looked at the chairs. No. Did you? Neither of us had. We stood in the kitchen for a moment, both looking at the table, and then Claire said, it was probably just the way we left it and we're not remembering right. And I said, yeah, probably, and we both went to get changed. But I noticed she didn't laugh that time. Underscore 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 underscore. Saturday night was worse. We stayed up later, partly because we'd both got a second wind and partly, though neither of us said it, because neither of us was in a rush to go to sleep. We played cards at the kitchen table. We talked. The fire was going. It was almost normal. Except at one point, maybe around 10:30, Claire got up to get a glass of water, and I heard her stop moving in the kitchen. Just stop. And then she came back and sat down and she'd forgotten the water. What? I said. Nothing. She shook her head. I thought I saw something outside the window. The kitchen window faced the tree line, maybe 30 feet from the cabin. Solid dark out there by that point. Like what? Like someone standing at the edge of the trees. She said it flatly, like she was trying to report a fact and not panic about it. But it was probably just a branch. The way the light from the window hits the snow, it plays tricks. I went to the window and looked out. Just trees. Dark space between them. Snow catching the cabin light in the first few feet, and then nothing past that. I didn't see anything. But I stood there for longer than I needed to, staring into the dark, and I had the particular feeling. You know this feeling, I think most people do, of not being sure whether I wanted to see something or not. Because seeing nothing should feel like relief. It didn't. It felt like the thing I was looking for had simply moved. We went to bed around midnight. I woke up at 2 a.m. again. I know because I checked my phone immediately this time. The nightstand clock read 11:58. I stared at it. My phone said 2:03 a.m. The clock said 11:58, the same time I'd checked it when we went to bed. My mouth went dry. I got up very slowly, trying not to wake Claire, and walked to the bedroom doorway and looked into the main room of the cabin. The fire had burned down to embers. Everything was still. The armchair in the corner, it had been angled toward the fireplace when we went to bed, the way you'd position a reading chair. Now it was turned. Not all the way around. Maybe 45 degrees. Enough that whoever sat in it would be facing the hallway. Facing the bedroom door. Facing me. I stood there in the doorway for what felt like a full minute, just looking at it. My heart was doing something strange. Not pounding exactly, more like it had forgotten its rhythm and was trying to find it again. The cabin was silent. The front door was locked. I checked it myself before bed. The windows were all latched. There was no one else in here. I went and checked anyway. Every room. The small bathroom. the utility closet by the entrance. I even opened the front door and looked outside, letting in a wash of freezing air, and stood on the small porch and stared at the tree line. Nothing. Just snow and trees and the particular silence of a place far from everything. I went back to bed. I didn't move the chair back. I don't know why. I think some part of me didn't want to touch it. I didn't sleep again that night. Underscore 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 underscore. In the morning, I told Claire everything. I sat down at the kitchen table with my coffee, and I told her about the clock both nights. The chairs at the table. And Claire, who is not a dramatic person, who has worked nights in an ER and seen things that would make most people fall apart, who I have never once seen get rattled by something that turned out to be nothing, listened with her cup held in both hands, and when I finished she was quiet for a moment. "I want to leave," she said. "Yeah. Like, I want to leave today." "Yeah. I know. We should have. That's the part one go back to, over and over. We should have packed our bags that morning and driven back to Vancouver, and that would have been the end of it. A strange weekend, an unsettling rental, a story we'd tell at dinner parties for years. The cabin that reset itself. Haha. But it was Sunday. We'd paid for 3 nights. And in the daylight, with the snow coming down pretty and the coffee hot and the whole thing feeling slightly ridiculous, we both started doing the thing people do, which is negotiate with our own fear. We were tired. We were probably just misremembering. The clock had a bad battery. Old cabin settle and shift. We called Glenn on the landline and told him the clock in the bedroom seemed to be broken, and he said he'd take a look. He showed up about an hour later, replaced the battery, told us the cabin had been in the family for decades, and it was all solid construction, nothing to worry about. He was perfectly normal, perfectly pleasant. I watched his face the whole time he was there, and there was nothing in it except mild inconvenience at having to drive out in the snow. We decided to stay one more night and leave Monday morning. I think about that decision constantly. Underscore 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 underscore. Sunday was quiet. We barely spoke about it. We went for a drive, had lunch in Whistler Village, walked around, bought some things at a little market. The ordinary, deliberate busyness of 2 people trying to feel normal. By the time we got back to the cabin in the late afternoon, it had almost worked. I cooked dinner. Claire opened wine. We watched something on her downloaded Netflix on her laptop, half paying attention. We went to bed at 11. I remember thinking, just one more night. Just get through one more night. I woke up at 2 a.m. I knew before I even opened my eyes. The way the air felt. The stillness. I checked my phone. 2:01 a.m. I looked at the clock. 11:58. And then I looked at the foot of the bed. There was a shadow standing at the foot of the bed. I need you to understand that what I mean when I say shadow is not a vague darkness or a trick of light. I mean a figure. The shape of a person, dark against the slightly less dark wall behind it, standing completely still, facing the bed. Facing us. I did not move. I did not breathe. I lay there with my heart seizing in my chest, staring at this shape, trying to make it into something else. A pile of clothes on the chair. A coat hanging somewhere. But there was no chair at the foot of the bed. There was no coat hook on that wall. There was nothing there that could make that shape. It was tall, slightly taller than average, standing with its arms at its sides. Claire was asleep beside me, breathing slowly. I could not make a sound. I want to tell you I'm the kind of person who acts in a crisis, but in that moment every single function of my body except vision had simply shut down. I could only look at it, and then slowly, so slowly, it turned its head. Toward me. I grabbed Claire's arm. I grabbed it hard and she woke up saying what, already alarmed because I never grab her like that, and I said quietly through a jaw that was barely working, "Don't scream. There's someone in the room." And Claire, who is made of something the rest of us aren't, went silent for exactly 2 seconds. Then she reached slowly over to the nightstand and turned on the lamp. The room was empty. No figure. Nothing at the foot of the bed. Just the bare wooden floor and the wall and the window with frost on the glass. We stared. The room was small. There was nowhere to go. Whatever I had seen, Whatever had been there was gone. Claire looked at me. Her face was white. "I believe you," she said quietly. "We're leaving right now. Underscore 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 underscore. We packed in 12 minutes. I counted. I remember because I was counting everything. Numbers the only thing keeping my brain tethered. 12 minutes to get every bag into the car. Claire did a sweep of the bathroom while I carried things out to the car, and when she came back to the bedroom to grab her last bag, she stopped in the doorway. "Daniel," she said. Her voice was strange, flat and careful. I came to stand behind her. The armchair, the one from the main room. It had been moved again while we were packing. It was now sitting directly at the foot of the bed, facing the headboard, where the figure had been standing. And on the seat of the chair, laid flat like someone had just set it down, the clock from the nightstand, turned face up, reading 11:58. Neither of us spoke. We walked to the front door, we got in the car, and we drove. I drove for 40 minutes without speaking. I think I was in shock. Claire had her arms wrapped around herself and was staring out the window, and we were both just processing the fact that we were out of it. We were out, and we were moving, and the distance was growing, and we were going to be okay. We stopped at a gas station in Squamish, both of us needing to just be somewhere lit and public and populated. I called Glenn from my cell phone, which had signal again, and told him we'd left early and there was something wrong with the cabin. We wanted our last night refunded. There was a long pause on the line, and then Glenn said very carefully, "Has anything happened to you? Are you both all right?" That question, the way he asked it, like it wasn't a customer service question, like it was a real one. "What do you mean?" I said. Another pause. "A couple stayed in that cabin 3 years ago," he said. "They reported similar things. Objects moved. Clock going backwards. One of them said they saw someone in the room." He stopped. "They left too. Middle of the night." He paused again. "I've never spent a night in that cabin myself." I didn't know what to say to that. "You should have told us," was all I managed. "I know," he said, and he sounded like he meant it, like he'd been carrying that for a while. He refunded the night. We never went back. Underscore 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 underscore. It's been over a year now. Claire doesn't like to talk about it much. She says she processes things by moving past them, and I respect that. But sometimes I catch her checking locks twice when we're in an unfamiliar place, or pausing in a doorway in the dark before she reaches for the light. Small new habits neither of us had before. I've thought about that cabin 100 times. I've tried to explain it 100 ways. Maybe it was someone breaking in, a local with a key, someone messing with tourists for reasons I don't want to think about too hard. Maybe the clock malfunction was real, and the furniture movement was a product of two exhausted, wine-softened people misremembering small things and building a narrative from the gaps. Maybe there's something about that specific structure, that specific location, that causes some kind of perceptual distortion I can't name. But here's what I can't explain. The chair at the foot of the bed. The clock placed on it. That wasn't a trick of memory. We both saw it. We saw it together. Something in that cabin knew we were leaving, and it wanted us to know it knew. I don't say this to scare you. I do a little. Because I think fear has a function. I think the thing in your chest that says leave, this is wrong, something here is not right, that thing exists for a reason. We have 100 years of cultural programming telling us we're being dramatic, we're overreacting, we should give things the benefit of the doubt. Be rational. Don't make a scene. We spent 2 days rationalizing. 2 days talking ourselves out of what we were feeling. If you ever find yourself in a place that doesn't feel right, a place that feels like it's watching, or waiting, or resetting, don't spend 2 days on it. Just leave. Don't be like us. Don't wait to see the shadow at the foot of the bed. Because here's the part that still wakes me up sometimes at 2 a.m., lying in my own bed in my own apartment with the door locked and the lights on. Whatever was happening in that cabin, whatever was replaying in those walls, it was showing us something. Not scaring us randomly. Showing us. A chair moved. A clock rewound. A figure standing over a bed. 3 years before us, another couple saw the same things. Left the same night. I don't know what happened in cabin 13 before any of us got there. Glenn didn't say and I didn't ask, because I think somewhere in my gut I already knew I didn't want the answer. But whatever it was, it's still in there, waiting for the next couple who thinks they need a quiet weekend away. Sleep well. Underscore 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 underscore. If this story sounds familiar, if you've stayed somewhere that felt wrong in a way you couldn't explain, I believe you. Don't let anyone talk you out of what you felt. Story number 4. Have you ever had that moment where you realize, not all at once, but slowly like cold water rising around your ankles, that something is deeply, fundamentally wrong? Not the jump scare kind of wrong. Not the loud, obvious kind. The quiet kind. The kind where every instinct you have is screaming at you, but your rational brain keeps finding reasons to stay calm, to stay put, to take one more step forward. That's what happened to me in Banff, and I've never really talked about it in full. Not because I don't want to, but because every time I start, people look at me the way people look at someone they're worried about. Like maybe the wilderness did something to my head. Like maybe I imagined it. I didn't imagine it. My name is Layla. I was 28 when this happened. I'm 31 now. I work in marketing, I live in Toronto, and before that summer, I was the kind of person who had a 5-year plan, color-coded calendars, and a mild addiction to oat milk lattes. Boring, in the best way. Predictable. Safe. I'd just gotten out of a 3-year relationship. Mutual decision, we kept saying, which is what two people say when neither of them wants to admit how badly things had fractured. I wasn't devastated. I was just hollow, a little lost. And when a friend suggested I take a solo trip somewhere beautiful before I jumped back into the usual grind, it sounded exactly right. She suggested Banff. I'd never been. I'm not even a particularly outdoorsy person, but I'd seen the pictures, that impossible turquoise of Lake Louise, the mountains reflected in still water, the kind of landscapes that don't look like they belong in the same world as rush hour traffic and office Slack messages. I booked a 4-day trip almost impulsively. Small Airbnb just outside the town proper. Light hiking. Nature. Quiet. I flew in on a Thursday in late August. The air hit me first, clean in a way that Toronto air genuinely isn't. Cool and thin. The mountains were just there, enormous and permanent, the way things are when they've existed long before you and will exist long after. I remember standing in the parking lot of my rental, bag at my feet, and just breathing for a second. I thought, this was the right call. The first 2 days were perfect. I did the easy stuff, Johnston Canyon, a gentle trail around Vermilion Lakes, a half-day trip up to the Icefields Parkway just to see it. I ate by myself at restaurants and didn't feel sad about it. I took too many photos. I slept well, which I hadn't been doing at home. I felt like a person again. The third day is the one I need to tell you about. I talked to a guy at the Airbnb, the host, kind of a weathered outdoorsy type, mid-40s, friendly in that easy, unhurried way people in small mountain towns sometimes are. I asked him about trails. He walked me through a few, pulled up a trail map on his phone, marked some good spots for someone at my experience level. Nothing too technical. Stay on the marked paths. Tell someone where you're going. Standard stuff. I thanked him, screenshot the map, and drove out toward the trailhead he'd recommended. A moderate loop about 8 kilometers, supposed to take 3 to 4 hours, excellent views of the valley. I had water, snacks, a light jacket, my phone fully charged. I signed the little register at the trailhead with my name, and start time the way the sign asks you to. The first hour was everything I'd hoped for. Real forest. Spruce and pine so dense the light came through in long, separated beams. The trail was clearly marked, wide enough in most places for 2 people, with those little orange trail markers every 100 meters or so. I passed maybe 5 or 6 other hikers in the first stretch. A couple, a group of 3, a man with a dog. Normal Saturday morning energy. Around the 90-minute mark, the trail bent south along a ridge, and I stopped to eat a snack and look at the view. And that's when I noticed it. Off to my left, through a gap in the trees, there was another path. It wasn't on the map. I checked twice. It wasn't the trail I was on, and it wasn't any offshoot I'd been told about. It was just a path. Not overgrown, not clearly wild. It looked like it had been used. Compressed earth. The trees on either side naturally parted, like something had been walking through there for long enough to make it a habit. The rational voice in my head said, probably a game trail. Animals move in patterns. Deer, elk, whatever. They make their own paths. But I kept looking at it. There was something about it that felt human. The width was right. The height was right. And there were no branches broken at low animal height. It was cleared at about shoulder level, the kind of clearance a person would naturally create moving through brush over time. I didn't go down it. I remember consciously deciding not to. I even turned away, put my water bottle back in my pack, and kept walking the main trail. I made it maybe another 20 minutes before I stopped again. I don't know what to tell you about why I went back. Curiosity is too small a word. It wasn't even really curiosity. It was more like a pull. The way a wound draws your finger, even when you know you shouldn't touch it. I'd been doing everything safe and sensible for 3 days. I told myself it was probably nothing. A short side path that led to a viewpoint the host had forgotten to mention. 5 minutes down and back, just to know. I found the gap in the trees and turned onto the path. The first thing I noticed was the sound. Or rather, the absence of it. Now, Banff Forest is not silent. There's always something, wind in the canopy, birds, the distant sound of water if you're near a creek. The main trail had all of that. But the moment I stepped onto this secondary path, it was like someone had quietly turned a dial. The birdsong didn't stop immediately. It faded, like the birds just had less and less to say the deeper in I went. By the time I'd walked maybe 4 or 5 minutes, I was in proper quiet. The kind of quiet that has texture, the kind that makes your own breathing feel loud. The trees were older here, bigger, thicker, more crowded. The light dropped noticeably. I checked my phone, still had signal, which was a small relief, and looked at my GPS. I was maybe 80 meters off the main trail. Not far. The path continued, clear and deliberate. I kept going. I'm not going to pretend I wasn't unsettled at this point. I was. But the unsettled feeling had that strange companionship with curiosity, like they were walking side by side in me, and neither one was winning yet. The path was still visible. I could see it extending forward. I wasn't bushwhacking. I wasn't lost. I'd been on it for maybe 12 or 13 minutes when the trees opened up slightly into what I can only describe as a small clearing. Not dramatic, just a natural thinning of the forest, a rough oval of space maybe 30 feet across, with a large flat boulder at the far edge. And standing near that boulder were 2 people. They weren't moving. They were facing me. I stopped walking. Here's the thing about that moment that I still can't fully explain. They were just standing there. 2 adults, a man and a woman from what I could tell, maybe 40 meters away. Just standing still, facing in my direction. People hike. People stop to rest. People stand in clearings and look at nature. There was nothing inherently wrong about 2 people standing in the woods. But they weren't looking at the trees. They weren't resting. They were facing directly toward the path I'd just come down, toward me specifically, as though they'd been standing there waiting for exactly this, for someone to walk into that clearing. I raised my hand in the half-wave you do when you pass another hiker. The universal acknowledgement that we're both human beings out enjoying the same mountain. Neither of them moved. No wave back, no nod, no smile, nothing. I stood there for what felt like a long time, but was probably 10 seconds. My brain was doing rapid-fire calculations. Okay, maybe they didn't see me. No, they were facing me directly. Maybe they were just zoned out, meditating, some kind of nature practice. I was about to call out, something neutral, something normal, a hi or hey there, when I noticed the third person. Slightly to the right of the boulder, partially obscured by the shadow of a large spruce, there was a third figure, standing with the same stillness, same posture, facing the same direction. I hadn't seen them at first because of the shadow. I only caught them because they were slightly taller than the tree line around them, and the shape of their shoulders gave them away. 3 people, standing completely still, watching the path I'd just walked down. The rational explanations started collapsing one by one, and what was left underneath all of them was something old and animal and very clear. Run. I didn't run. I wish I had, actually. Instead, I did something almost worse. I took a step backward, slowly, like maybe if I moved quietly enough they wouldn't notice. Like I could just ease myself back onto the main path and pretend this had been nothing. The woman, the one on the left, turned her head. Slowly. Not a normal look up when you hear a sound turn. Slow and deliberate. The way you'd move if you were trying very hard to control your movements, to seem calm. She didn't look away from me. She held eye contact across those 40 meters with an expression I couldn't read at that distance, but the word that comes to mind is patient. She looked patient, in the way that implies she'd been waiting for a long time and wasn't bothered by it. I took another step back, and then the man moved. He didn't walk toward me. He didn't shout or gesture or do anything that I can describe as overtly threatening. He just started walking, not toward me, but around the left side of the clearing, along the tree line, like he was going to circle around. That was enough. I turned and I walked. Not running. My legs were shaking badly enough that I wasn't sure I could run without falling. But walking fast, the kind of purposeful walking that was right on the edge of breaking into a sprint. I kept my eyes on the path ahead. The path back. Those orange-marked trees of the main trail were approximately 100 meters ahead of me, and they felt like they were on the other side of the world. I did not hear footsteps behind me. I don't know if that made it better or worse. I kept checking over my shoulder. Once, twice, 5 times. Each time, nothing. The path behind me was empty. The trees were still. The silence was still wrong, still that same flattened, textureless quiet, but nothing was following me that I could see. When I hit the main trail, when I physically stepped back onto the wide, marked, mapped path, I felt something release in my chest, like a breath I'd been holding for minutes without knowing it. I actually put my hand on one of the orange trail markers, on the physical post, like I needed the confirmation that I was back on something real. I walked back to the trailhead in under 40 minutes. The trail was 3 kilometers, and I was nearly jogging the whole way, stopping every 60 seconds to look back. I passed 2 hikers going the other direction, and I considered saying something, warned them about the side trail, about the people. I opened my mouth, closed it. They looked at me a little oddly, probably because I was breathing hard and clearly rattled, said a polite afternoon, and moved on. What was I supposed to say? There were people standing quietly in the woods. They looked at me weird. I got back to my car and sat in the driver's seat with the doors locked for a while. I drove straight back to the Airbnb, bypassing the town stop I'd planned. I told my host what I'd found, the path, the clearing, the 3 people. He got quiet in a way that felt different from how he'd been quiet before. He asked me to describe exactly where on the trail I'd noticed the opening, which direction it went, how long I'd walked before reaching the clearing. He was calm about it, methodical, but there was something behind his eyes. I asked him if he knew about it, if it was a marked path he'd forgotten to mention. He said no. He said he'd been in the park for 16 years and had covered most of the surrounding trails. He didn't know of any path there. He asked again about the people. I described them the best I could, their stillness, the way the man had started moving, the woman's expression. He suggested I report it to the park warden office in the morning. He said there had been, over the years, occasional reports of squatters in the backcountry, people who set up semi-permanent camps in areas off the main trails. He said it was rare, but it happened. He was very careful about what he did and didn't say. I asked him straight, should I be worried? He said he thought I'd done the right thing by leaving. That's not the same as no. I did go to the warden office the next morning before my flight. The ranger I spoke to was professional and thorough. Took notes. Got the specific trail, the approximate location on the ridge, my contact information. Said they'd send someone to check it. I never heard back. I followed up twice by email. The first time I got a form response saying they'd looked into it and found no evidence of unauthorized encampments in that section. The second time, no response at all. Sometimes I tell myself that means they found nothing, that it was exactly what my brain kept trying to explain it as, hikers who happened to be still, a coincidence of timing and silence and unease. That I was a woman alone in the woods, already at a heightened state of anxiety because of the solo trip and the breakup and the unfamiliar terrain, and my nervous system overreacted to something normal. I've mostly stopped telling myself that. Here's what I keep coming back to. The path was clear. It wasn't a game trail. Something had been using it regularly enough to keep it open, to keep the brush cleared at shoulder height, for what would have had to be a long time. And those 3 people were not surprised to see me. They were not startled by a stranger appearing at the edge of their clearing. They were waiting. Whether they were waiting for me specifically, or just for anyone who happened to follow that path, I don't know. I genuinely do not know which answer is worse. I've done a lot of reading since then, about backcountry squatters, about the strange subset of people who disappear from conventional life and create their own spaces in wilderness areas, sometimes for years. Most of them are harmless, broken people, isolated people, people running from something. But not all of them. There are documented cases in national parks across North America. Individuals and small groups who establish themselves in areas just off the trails, in spots where they can watch without being seen, where they can observe who comes and who goes, where a person who steps off the main path, curious, unaware, alone, might find themselves very far from help very quickly. I got lucky. I don't think I had any particular skill or awareness. I think I got lucky because I hesitated, because I moved slowly rather than walking further into the clearing, because whatever those people intended, if they intended anything, didn't have time to become action before I was gone. I think about the hikers I passed on my way back, the ones I almost warned and then didn't. I hope they stayed on the marked trails. Here's what I want you to take from this. Not just as a scary story to listen to while you're winding down, though I hope it kept you with me, but as an actual thing I learned in a way I didn't choose to learn it. When the forest goes quiet, pay attention. Not every silence is nothing. Animals are quiet around things that scare them. The absence of sound in a place that should have sound is information. When your gut tells you to back up, back up. Don't negotiate with the feeling. Don't give the rational explanation one more chance to win. The rational explanation can be right 99 times, and the one time it's wrong can be the last time you're in a position to be right about anything. Stay on the marked paths. I know that sounds obvious. I know it sounds like something they print on a laminated sign at the trailhead, and you skim over while you're fixing your pack. I'm telling you, it's not bureaucracy. It's not overcaution. It's the difference between being someone on a map, someone whose route is recorded, whose absence will be noticed, who signed a register at a known trailhead, and being someone who stepped off the edge of the known world because they were curious about a path that led somewhere no one official can find you. I still love mountains. I went back to Banff 2 summers later with 2 friends, and we stayed on every marked trail, and it was beautiful, and I was fine. But every now and then, walking through any kind of forest, I'll pass a gap in the trees. A path that isn't on any map, that looks just wide enough, just clear enough, just traveled enough to make you wonder. And I think about 3 people standing perfectly still, facing the direction I came from, like they'd been there for years, like they were still there, and I keep walking. Have you ever taken a photograph and felt, in the moment after the flash, that you'd captured something you weren't supposed to see? Not a ghost, not something supernatural, just something wrong. Something that made you stare at the image and feel this cold, crawling certainty that the world you thought you understood had just shifted slightly to the left. That happened to me 3 years ago, at Peggy's Cove, Nova Scotia, and I still haven't fully made peace with what I saw. My name is Daniel Mercer. I was 31 at the time, a freelance photographer based out of Halifax. Nothing glamorous about the job, honestly. Mostly I did corporate headshots, the occasional wedding, some product photography for local businesses. But the thing that kept me going, the reason I'd gotten into photography in the first place, was landscape work. Seascapes specifically. There's something about the Atlantic coast that I'd been obsessed with since I was a kid. The way light moves over water, the way the rocks look like they've been there since before everything, like they don't care that you're standing on them. Peggy's Cove had been on my list for years. I know, it's the postcard spot. The tourist trap. Every amateur photographer within 500 kilometers has shot that lighthouse at golden hour and posted it to Instagram with some quote about solitude. But there's a reason that place keeps drawing people in, and it's not just the lighthouse itself. It's the feeling of it, the way it sits out there on the edge of those massive gray rocks with nothing but open ocean behind it, and you get this sense that you're standing at the end of something, the end of the continent, the end of civilization. Just the lighthouse, and then the sea, and then whatever's out there beyond the horizon. I drove down in October. Late October, which I knew was risky weather-wise, but that was exactly why I wanted to go. I'd seen too many summer shots of that place. Clear skies, calm water, families posing. I wanted the storm version. The wild, desolate, nobody else is crazy enough to be here version. I got there on a Thursday afternoon. Checked into a small and about 10 minutes from the cove. One of those old converted houses where the floorboards creak and the owner leaves homemade muffins on the kitchen table. The woman who ran it, her name was Margaret, late 60s, kind face, had lived in the area her whole life. She asked what brought me down. I told her I was a photographer. Landscape work. She smiled and said, "Peggy's, I assume?" I said yes. Her smile stayed, but something behind her eyes shifted just slightly. She said, "Just be careful about the rocks when the weather's coming in. We lose a tourist or 2 every few years." Waves come in fast, and they don't warn you. I told her I'd be careful. I'd read the signs. I knew the rules. She nodded and handed me my room key, and didn't say anything else. Underscore 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 underscore. I went out that first evening around 4:30. The sky was doing exactly what I'd hoped, this bruised, heavy purple-gray, clouds moving fast from the southwest, the kind of sky that makes everything beneath it look small and mortal. There were a handful of other people at the cove when I arrived, but they cleared out pretty quickly once the wind picked up. By 5 o'clock I was basically alone, and it was extraordinary. I'm not going to oversell it, but standing out there with the spray coming off the rocks and that lighthouse cutting up against the dark sky, it was one of those moments where you almost forget to take pictures because you're too busy just feeling the place. There's a presence to it that photographs never quite capture. The sound alone, the waves hitting those granite boulders sound different from regular surf. Heavier, more final, like something enormous is repeatedly trying to break through from the other side. I shot for about 2 hours, moved around the rocks, tried different angles, got low to the ground to get the lighthouse silhouetted against what was left of the sky. I was careful. I stayed back from the black zone, the dark wet rocks closest to the water's edge where the waves had been reaching. There are warning signs everywhere, and Margaret's words were fresh in my head, and honestly, the ocean that evening didn't need any signage to communicate that it was not to be messed with. I headed back to my car around 7. Cold, happy, fingers aching, the kind of tired that comes from doing something you actually love. That night I loaded the photos onto my laptop and went through them over a cup of tea in my room. Most of them were exactly what I'd hoped. Moody, dramatic, technically solid. I went through about 200 shots just doing a basic cull, flagging the keepers. And then I got to a sequence I'd taken around 6:15, a wide shot from up on the viewing area, capturing the lighthouse and the full expanse of rocks to the south, with the ocean churning behind it. I almost scrolled past it. It was a bit soft. Not quite the composition I wanted. But something made me stop. There was a figure on the rocks, standing in the black zone, right at the edge where the waves were breaking. I zoomed in. It was a person, clearly a person. Dark clothing, standing perfectly still, facing the ocean, maybe 30 feet from the water's edge at the point where the waves had been surging up. No camera, no fishing gear, nothing in their hands, just standing there, completely still in a way that felt, I don't know how to explain this, it felt deliberate. Not like someone who'd wandered too close by accident, like someone who had chosen to be exactly there. I sat with that image for a long time. I tried to remember seeing anyone out there when I was shooting. I'd thought I was alone, but it was getting dark. I'd been focused on the lighthouse. I was moving around. It was possible someone had come down the rocks from a different access point. It was possible. I told myself it was possible. What I couldn't explain was how still they were. Even in the long exposures I'd taken earlier that evening, where any movement would blur slightly, this figure was sharp, completely motionless. While the waves were breaking around them, and the wind was clearly violent in every other element of the shot. I closed the laptop and told myself I was tired and reading too much into it. Underscore 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 underscore. I went back the next morning. It was calmer, clearer, different light. I wanted to get some dawn shots, that cold blue hour before the sun comes fully up. I was back at the cove by 6:30 and again, pretty much alone. A couple of dog walkers. An older man sitting in his truck in the parking lot drinking coffee. I was setting up on the rocks when I noticed the old man had gotten out of his truck and was walking toward me. Unhurried. He had the look of someone who'd spent decades outdoors, weathered face, good waterproof gear. He introduced himself as Gary. Local fisherman, semi-retired. He asked if I was shooting for a publication or just personal work. I said it was personal mostly, maybe some stock licensing. He nodded and we chatted for a few minutes about the area, the light conditions, the weather system that had moved through the night before. And then, almost as an afterthought, I mentioned the figure in my photo. I even pulled out my phone and showed him the image. I'd exported a copy the night before. His expression changed. Not dramatically, He didn't gasp or step back. He just went quiet. And then he looked at me in that particular way that people look at you when they're deciding how much of something to tell you. He said, "Where exactly was this taken from? Can you tell?" I pointed out the approximate shooting position. He looked at the image again and then back at the rocks in the middle distance, and he said very calmly, "The area where that person is standing. At 6:15 yesterday evening with that swell, those rocks would have been under about 2 feet of wash every 30 seconds or so. The waves were coming in on a 15-second interval most of the evening. I watched them from my truck. Taller sets would have been clearing that shelf completely." I stared at him. He handed my phone back. He said, "I'm not saying what you did or didn't photograph. I'm just telling you that nobody stands there during a high swell like that. Not by choice. You'd be pulled in inside of a minute." I looked down at the image. The figure was still there. Perfectly still. Perfectly sharp. I said, "Could someone have survived it? If they got swept in?" Gary looked out at the ocean for a moment. Then he said, "People have gone in off these rocks in calmer conditions than yesterday, and we never found them. The current pulls south and then out. There's no swimming back from that water. Not in October." He said it without drama. Just fact. The way someone says something they've known for a long time. We stood there for another minute without talking. Then he said he hoped I got some good shots, and he walked back to his truck, and that was it. I spent the rest of that morning in a strange, suspended state. I kept shooting because that's what I do when I don't know what else to do. I put a camera in front of my face and focus on the technical problems. F-stop, shutter speed, depth of field, things with answers. But my mind kept going back to the photograph. Here's what I couldn't stop circling around. It wasn't just that someone was standing in a dangerous spot. People do stupid things. Tourists, adrenaline seekers, people who don't understand how fast ocean conditions change. That happens. That's tragic, but it's explainable. What I couldn't explain was the stillness. I've shot in wind like that. Even well-anchored subjects blur slightly in long exposures if there's enough wind. Trees move. Flags snap. Clothing ripples. The water in that image was visibly moving, catching light in dozens of directions. The figure wasn't moving at all. Not their coat. Not their hair. Nothing. It was like they'd been placed there. I went back to my inn for lunch and sat with my laptop and went through every frame from that sequence. 3 shots in a row, roughly 20 seconds apart based on the metadata. The figure was in 2 of them, gone in the 3rd. In the second image, they'd turned slightly. They were facing the camera. I hadn't noticed that the night before. I'd stopped at the first image. But in the second one, same stillness, same impossible calm. The figure had rotated maybe 30 degrees and was oriented, unmistakably, toward where I'd been standing. My heart did something unpleasant when I realized that. Because here's the thing. If this was a person, a real living person, then they had seen me. They had been aware of me on those rocks that evening. And they had turned to look at me, and I had never seen them. Not once. I had been out there alone, or thought I was, for 2 hours, moving around the rocks in the dark. And someone had been watching me from the black zone the entire time. That thought was almost worse than the alternative. Underscore 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 underscore. I went back to the cove that afternoon. I don't entirely know why. Maybe I needed to close a loop. Maybe I needed to stand in that spot and feel nothing and go home and tell myself it was a weird coincidence and a trick of the light. Margaret was in the inn kitchen when I came back for my camera bag, and she asked how the morning shoot went. I hesitated. Then I showed her the photo. She looked at it for a long time, longer than Gary had. Then she set my phone down on the kitchen table very carefully and said, "How long have you been here?" I said, "Just last night and today. I'm leaving tomorrow morning." She nodded slowly. She said, "There's a story about this place. I don't tell it to guests usually because I don't want to be that person, you know? The spooky innkeeper." She almost smiled. "But there have been, over the years, other photographs. From other visitors. Similar things." I asked her what she meant by similar. She said, "Figures. On the rocks. During high water. Most of the time people just think they captured a tourist who wandered too close. But every so often someone asks around, and we have to tell them the same thing Gary probably told you." She paused. "Nobody's standing there when those waves are running, and nobody's walked away from going in. I asked her if she had a theory. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My grandmother used to say that certain places hold on to certain moments. That what you're seeing isn't there now. It's from before. Like a recording the rock kept." She picked up her tea mug. "I don't know if I believe that. I'm a practical person. But I've lived here 64 years and I've seen things I can't explain, and I've stopped trying to fit them into boxes that feel comfortable." She looked at me very directly and said, "Delete the photos if they're bothering you. Go home. Sleep in your own bed. Don't go back out to the rocks tonight." The way she said that last part, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a warning from a movie. It was just a woman who'd lived her whole life near that water telling me something she believed, quietly and sincerely. I asked her why. Why not go back tonight? She said, "Because some places notice when you notice them. And once they do, you should stop paying attention." Underscore 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 underscore. I didn't go back to the rocks that night. I packed up, had dinner at a little place in the village, talked to a couple at the next table about completely normal things, drove back to the inn, sat on my bed with my laptop open and the photos loaded for about an hour. And then I closed the laptop without deleting them, but without looking at them again either. I left the next morning, just after dawn. Drove north up the coast with the sun coming in from the right side and the ocean flat and gray and enormous out to my left. I didn't stop at the cove. I didn't pull over for one last shot. I just drove. Underscore 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 underscore. Back in Halifax, I processed the rest of the trip's photos over the following week. Good work. Some of my best coastal stuff, honestly. I licensed 3 images to a travel publication and 1 to a Nova Scotia tourism board. Not the lighthouse shots, some of the ones I'd taken further up the coast. The photographs with the figure in them sat in a folder on my hard drive. I looked at them a few more times over the following months. Showed them to 2 other photographers I trusted. Both of them went quiet the same way Gary had. One of them suggested motion blur anomalies or JPEG compression artifacts. He didn't sound convinced by his own explanation. I've never posted them. I've thought about it. Part of me wants that external validation. Wants someone online to look at them and say, "Yes, that's clearly a person who wandered too close and you're overthinking this." The rational explanation. The one that lets me sleep. But another part of me thinks about what Margaret said. About places that notice when you notice them. And I figure the safest thing is to keep those images in a folder that I don't open very often, and to let Peggy's Cove go on doing what it's done for as long as anyone can remember, sitting at the edge of the continent on those ancient gray rocks, waves breaking, lighthouse turning, keeping whatever it keeps to itself. I've been back to Nova Scotia twice since then. Both times I drove the coast road. Both times I passed the turnoff for Peggy's Cove. Both times I kept going. Some places don't need your attention. Some places have enough of their own. And sometimes, if you're quiet and you're honest with yourself, you know exactly which places those are. The photograph is still there. Folder on my desktop. 3rd drive in my backup system. I haven't deleted it, and I don't think I will. But I haven't looked at it in over a year. I think that's probably the right call. Underscore 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 underscore. If you're ever at Peggy's Cove, and it's worth going, it really is, just stay back from the black rocks when the swell is running. Read the signs. Listen to the locals. And if you're shooting in the late evening, and the light is doing something beautiful, and you feel completely alone out there on those granite shelves with the ocean behind you, just double check that you actually are. Story number 6. Have you ever been on a train, late at night, almost empty, and felt like something was just off? Like the air in the car was a degree too cold, or the fluorescent lights were flickering in a way that felt less like a maintenance issue, and more like a warning. And you told yourself you were being paranoid, because that's what you do, right? You rationalize. You scroll your phone. You look at your shoes. I used to do that too. I don't do it anymore. What I'm about to tell you happened about 3 years ago, on a Tuesday night in November, on Toronto's Line 2 subway, the Bloor Danforth line. Most of you who've been to Toronto know it. That long east-west line that cuts straight through the city like a spine. Reliable. Busy during the day. Completely different at night. I was 22. I was in my second year of a communications degree at Ryerson. Sorry, Toronto Metropolitan University. They changed the name. I shared an apartment with 2 other students near Pape Station. My life was ordinary to the point of embarrassing. I went to class. I worked part-time at a print shop on Queen Street. I ate a lot of ramen. I stayed up too late watching YouTube videos. Normal. Completely, unremarkably normal. And then came the Tuesday that changed every single thing. Underscore 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 underscore. It started because of a study group. There were 5 of us. Me, my name's Daniel, and then Priya, who was sharp and organized and always brought color-coded notes. Marcus, who was pre-law and could argue both sides of any debate without breaking a sweat. Leah, who was quiet but brilliant, the kind of person who said one thing in a 2-hour session, and it was always the thing that cracked the whole problem open. And Jonah, my closest friend out of the group, someone I'd known since first-year orientation. We'd been meeting every Tuesday to prep for our media theory midterm. That particular Tuesday, we stayed late at the library on campus, the big one, with the glass walls on the upper floors. By the time we packed up and got outside, it was past midnight. The streets had that hollow, echoey quality they get in Toronto at that hour, where you can actually hear your own footsteps. We debated taking an Uber, but we were all broke, and Jonah pointed out that Pape Station was only 3 stops from Spadina, where we'd all transfer. Easy. We'd done this route 100 times. The 5 of us descended into Spadina Station just after 12:30. The platform was almost empty. One older man in a heavy coat sat at the far end, not looking at anything. A woman in scrubs stood near the yellow safety line, headphones in, staring at the tracks. That was it. 2 other people. The train came quickly. That distinctive rush of warm, stale air that comes before the headlights appear in the tunnel. We piled into the middle car, the 5 of us, the man in the coat, the woman in scrubs, and the doors closed with that pneumatic hiss, and we were moving. I remember Jonah made a joke about our professor. I remember laughing. I remember Priya pulling out her phone to look something up. I remember the lights flickering once. Just once. And then I remember looking up and realizing that Leah wasn't sitting with us anymore. Underscore 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 underscore. Now here's the thing. I didn't panic immediately. I looked around the car. It wasn't a long car. There were maybe 20 rows of seats, and I could see the whole thing from where I was sitting. She wasn't in any of them. I figured she'd moved to the doors. Sometimes people do that, stand near the doors, especially when they're getting off soon. Where's Leah? I asked. Priya looked up from her phone, looked around. She was just here. Marcus turned around in his seat. She probably moved to the other end. Jonah stood up and looked down the length of the car. She's not in here, he said. That was when my stomach did something uncomfortable. Not a drop exactly, more like a slow rotation. The kind of feeling that doesn't announce itself as fear, but quietly begins rearranging your insides. We checked both doors connecting to adjacent cars. They were locked. You know on the TTC, how sometimes those intercar doors don't open. They were like that, sealed. We hadn't stopped at any station yet. The train was still moving between Spadina and Bay, one of the longer stretches on the line. Leah was simply not in the car. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe she'd slipped into the next car before the doors locked. Maybe I'd missed her getting off somehow, even though I hadn't seen the doors open. Maybe I was tired and confused, and my brain was filling in gaps. I took a breath. I looked at the man in the heavy coat. He was still not looking at anything. His eyes were open but directed at the floor, at nothing. The woman in scrubs was still staring ahead, headphones in. Neither of them seemed bothered by our searching, our standing, our voices. She probably got off at Bay, Marcus said. Got confused, thought it was the right stop. We were all talking, Priya agreed. She might have zoned out. Jonah met my eyes. He didn't say anything, but I could see that he felt it too, that rotation in the gut, that wrong note hanging in the air. The train pulled into Bay Station. The doors opened. None of us got off. We stood there looking at the empty platform, half expecting to see Leah standing there confused. The platform was empty. The doors closed. Underscore 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 underscore. We were between Bay and Bluryoung when Marcus said he was going to try the emergency intercom near the doors. It was one of those old systems, a metal box with a button and a grill. He pressed it, got static, pressed it again, more static, and then a sort of low, even tone that didn't sound like a person responding. Priya tried calling Leah's cell. It rang twice and then went to voicemail. Maybe no signal underground, she said. There's signal on the TTC, Jonah said quietly. There has been for years. The woman in scrubs still hadn't moved, still hadn't looked at us. I don't know when exactly I started looking at the other passengers differently. It wasn't a sudden thing. It was gradual, the way you don't notice a room getting colder until you're already shivering. The man in the coat, the woman in scrubs, the way neither of them had reacted at all to 5 loud students searching a subway car, pressing intercoms, making phone calls. Normal people would have glanced over. Normal curiosity. Normal human social instinct. Neither of them had looked up once. The train pulled into Bluryoung, the biggest transfer station on the line. Usually there are people even at this hour, night shift workers, people coming from bars, TTC staff on the platform. The platform was empty. Not just quiet, empty. No one waiting. No staff visible. The big station with its high ceilings and its orange pillars, completely deserted. Priya went for the doors. She was going to get off. I could see it in her posture. She'd made the decision, and the doors didn't open. She pressed the door open button. Nothing. She looked at us. Pressed it again. The train sat there for a long moment, longer than a normal stop, and then moved on. The doors didn't open, Priya said. Her voice had changed. The collegiate confidence was gone. She sounded about 16 years old. We need to pull the emergency brake, Marcus said. There's an emergency brake cord on TTC cars. An orange handle near the ceiling in certain spots. Marcus found one and pulled it. The train did not slow down. I want you to think about that for a second. An emergency brake that does nothing. A train that doesn't stop. An empty station on a busy line at midnight. We stood there in the middle of that car, and I think all 4 of us, in that moment, understood that something was profoundly, structurally wrong. Not delayed train wrong. Not TTC having a bad night wrong. Something else. I don't know when Marcus left. That's the part that still makes me sick to think about, even now. He had been standing near the doors after the failed brake attempt. We were all talking over each other, trying to figure out what to do. Priya was calling emergency services and getting a rapid, busy signal that didn't sound right. Jonah was trying the intercom again. I was watching the windows, the dark tunnel walls streaming past, no stations, no signs, just concrete and darkness. And then Priya said, "Where's Marcus?" The same words. The same terrible words. He was not in the car. I stood up and I walked the entire length of the car slowly, checking every seat, checking the vestibules at each end. The man in the coat was still there. The woman in scrubs. For rows of empty seats. No Marcus. "This isn't possible," Priya whispered. And she was right. In any rational framework, it wasn't possible. You can't vanish from a sealed moving subway car. People don't just cease to exist between one moment and the next. But Leah was gone. And now Marcus was gone. And the woman in scrubs still hadn't looked up. That's when I did something that, looking back, I can't fully explain except as instinct. I walked toward her. I stood in front of her. I said, "Hey, excuse me." She didn't respond. I reached out and touched her shoulder. She turned to look at me, very slowly, the way someone turns when they're not surprised to be addressed, but have been waiting for it. And her eyes, I've spent 3 years trying to figure out how to describe her eyes, and the best I can manage is this. They were present but unoccupied. Like a house with the lights on, but no one home. She looked at me the way you look at something that you're observing rather than engaging with. Like a specimen. She said, in a voice that was completely flat and measured, "You should sit down." That was all. You should sit down. I backed away from her. I went back to Jonah and Priya and I said, very quietly, we need to stay together. We cannot separate. No matter what. Underscore 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 underscore. I'm going to be honest with you. The next portion is where things get harder for me to explain, and I've thought a lot about whether I'm misremembering, whether fear does something to your perception that makes events feel different than they were. I've gone back and forth on this for 3 years. What I know is this. Priya was holding my hand. I was holding her hand in Jonah's arm. We were standing together in the center of the car. I was not looking away, and I looked away for 1 second. Because the tunnel outside the window changed. There were lights. Not station lights. Different lights. Small and evenly spaced, amber-colored, lining the tunnel walls like something I'd never seen on any subway line I'd been on. They went past the windows in a rhythm that was almost hypnotic, and I turned to look at them because they were strange, and my brain reached for them involuntarily, the way your eyes go to sudden movement. 1 second. When I turned back, Priya was gone. I still hear myself saying her name sometimes, in a particular kind of dream. Priya. Just that. The sound of her name in that empty car, and the way it went nowhere. Underscore 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 underscore. Jonah and I stood back to back against one of the poles in the center of the car. We didn't let go of each other. We weren't talking anymore. Talking felt like it cost something we couldn't afford. The man in the heavy coat had his eyes closed now. The woman in scrubs was watching us. Not her phone. Not the floor. Us. With that same quality of attention that wasn't human attention. It was assessment. Like she was tracking a timeline. The train was still moving. I had no idea where we were. There are stretches of Line 2 that run underground for a long time. Spadina to Pape is entirely underground. But we'd been on this train for what felt like 40 minutes, and I hadn't seen a station in a long time. The stations we had stopped at had been empty. The brakes hadn't worked. The intercoms hadn't worked. I thought about what my life looked like from the outside. From my mom's perspective in Mississauga, I was a 22-year-old who'd gone to a library study session and would be home by 1 in the morning. My phone had service intermittently. I'd managed to text my roommate earlier in the night, and it had gone through. But now when I tried to send anything, it just sat in the outbox spinning. I thought about Leah, about Marcus, about Priya. I thought about whether thinking was going to be enough. And then Jonah said, very quietly, Dan, look at the windows. I looked. The reflection in the dark glass of the subway window. You know how subway windows at night become mirrors, the darkness of the tunnel turning the glass reflective, showed the car we were in. Our car. But in the reflection, the seats that were empty in reality were not empty in the reflection. The car in the reflection was full. Rows and rows of passengers, all facing forward, all still, filling every seat. And not one of them had a face that I could make out clearly. Not shadow exactly. More like the features simply didn't resolve when I tried to look at them directly. Like trying to see a star by staring straight at it instead of slightly to the side. I looked at the actual car. Empty seats. I looked at the reflection. Full. The woman in scrubs in the reflection was smiling. I grabbed Jonah's arm and I said, don't look at the windows. Underscore 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 underscore. Here's what saved us. And I mean that in the most mundane, anticlimactic, human way possible, because that's what survival actually looks like most of the time. Not heroic, not clever, just dumb luck wearing the right coat. At the far end of the car, near the rear doors, there was a maintenance access panel that I hadn't noticed before. A small door, maybe 2 feet by 3 feet, set into the wall. It had a standard flathead screw panel, the kind maintenance workers use. And it wasn't fully latched. It was open maybe a centimeter, a thin line of different air coming through it. Cooler, smelling of dust and metal and something electrical. Jonah saw it the same time I did. We moved toward it together, not running, because something about the atmosphere in that car told me that running would change things in a way we couldn't afford. We moved like you move when you're trying not to startle something. I got my fingers into the gap and pulled. The panel swung open. Behind it was a narrow service corridor, not a passage to another train car, something different. Running parallel to the outside of the car, accessible to maintenance workers doing trackside repairs. Tight, barely enough to slide through sideways, but it was there. I looked back. The woman in scrubs was standing up. She was standing in the center aisle, and she was no longer maintaining the pretense of being a human being going somewhere. She was just looking at us, and the man in the coat was looking at us. And in the reflection on the windows, every single one of the faceless passengers was turned our way. We went through the panel. I don't remember the next 8 minutes clearly. I remember cold metal under my hands. I remember a surface beneath my feet that wasn't a train floor, something industrial, slightly grated. I remember Jonah ahead of me in darkness, and the sound of the train still moving somewhere to our left. I remember a light, not amber, white, institutional. I remember a door with a push handle and a sign in orange letters that said emergency exit. Alarm will sound. We hit that handle together. The alarm sounded, loud and continuous, and the most beautiful sound I have ever heard in my life, because it was loud and real and physical, and it meant that systems were working and the world still operated by normal rules. We were in a service tunnel, concrete and pipes and TTC infrastructure. And maybe 60 seconds later, 2 TTC workers in high-vis vests came running toward us from down the tunnel, because the alarm had triggered at their station. I sat down on the concrete floor, and I could not stand up for a while. Underscore 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 underscore. There was an investigation. Of course there was. Leah, Marcus, and Priya were reported missing that night. Their families were contacted. TTC security reviewed what footage they could recover from the cameras on the train we'd been on. Story number 7. Have you ever heard your name called in an empty room? Or maybe you were almost asleep, right on that edge, and you heard someone whisper something so clearly you sat straight up, heart pounding, absolutely certain someone was there. But there wasn't. Most people chalk that up to a half-dream, a trick of the brain, that moment where consciousness and sleep blur together and your mind plays a little joke on you. I used to think that too. I don't anymore. What I'm about to tell you happened to me in the winter of 2019, and I have spent years trying to find a rational explanation for it. I've come close a few times. I've talked myself down from the ledge of believing what I think I saw. But every time winter rolls back around, every time I hear the wind howl in a certain way, or I'm driving at night and the snow hits the windshield just right, I remember. And all the rational explanations fall apart. My name is Claire Dufresne. I was 31 years old when this happened, and I was living in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, which is about as middle of nowhere as Canada gets if you don't know the province. Beautiful in the summer, brutal in the winter. I mean actually brutal. The kind of cold where your nostrils freeze together when you step outside, where exposed skin starts to go numb in minutes, where the wind comes screaming across those flat prairies with nothing, no mountains, no forest, nothing, to slow it down. I was working as a regional coordinator for a non-profit organization, which sounds more glamorous than it was. Basically, I drove to small communities around the province, checked in with local partners, attended meetings, filed reports. A lot of highway time. A lot of Tim Hortons and podcasts and rural radio stations with that particular static hiss you only get in remote areas. I was used to driving in winter. I'd grown up in Saskatchewan. My dad had drilled it into me since I was 16. What to do in a whiteout, how to steer into a slide, what to keep in your car, when to pull over. He was the kind of dad who made you pack a winter emergency kit every November without exception. Blanket, candles, matches, granola bars, an old pair of wool socks, a whistle, a small shovel. That kit lived in the trunk of my Subaru from November through March, every year without fail. That kit is probably the reason I'm alive to tell you this. The reason I'm sitting here, still unsettled 6 years later, is a little harder to explain. Underscore 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 underscore. It was the middle of January. I had a meeting in a small community called Langenboog, which is in eastern Saskatchewan, close to the Manitoba border, about a 3-hour drive from Saskatoon. The forecast that morning was calling for light snow in the afternoon, possible wind gusts, nothing unusual for January. So I went. I had the meeting, stayed for lunch with the local team, helped them sort through some grant paperwork. By the time I got back in my car, it was just past 2 in the afternoon, and the sky had changed. I noticed it immediately. That specific, flat, gray-white color that Saskatchewan skies turn when something serious is coming. Not just overcast, sealed. Like someone had lowered a ceiling. I checked my weather app. The forecast had been updated. The light snow had been upgraded to a winter storm warning. 30 to 40 centimeters expected. Wind gusts up to 90 kilometers per hour. Visibility near zero and blowing snow. I called my supervisor, told her what was happening. She said to use my judgment. I could stay in Langenboog overnight, find a motel, or I could try to make it back if I thought the window was still safe. Here's the thing about storm windows in Saskatchewan. They can close fast. Faster than the apps suggest. I looked at the sky again. I felt the wind when I'd walked to my car. I thought, okay, if I leave now, I can probably outrun it. It's still manageable. I know this road. That was my mistake. Not a dramatic mistake, not a stupid one. Just the kind of ordinary misjudgment that happens when you're experienced enough to feel confident and not quite experienced enough to know that confidence can lie. I pulled onto Highway 16 heading west. For the first 40 minutes, it was fine. Snowy, yes. Windy, yes. But I could see the road, I could see the lines, and I had the highway mostly to myself, which meant the plows had kept it decent. I was doing about 80, slower than usual, careful. I had the radio on. I remember a song playing. I don't remember which one. And then somewhere around the town of Yorkton, or maybe 20 minutes past it, I'm honestly not sure, the storm arrived. Not gradually. Not building up slowly the way storms sometimes do. It arrived like a wall. One moment I could see the road ahead of me. The next moment there was nothing. White. Absolute white in every direction. The wind hit the car so hard it shuddered, and I gripped the wheel and immediately took my foot off the gas because I could not see the road. I could not see the shoulder. I could not see anything except moving white. I slowed to almost nothing. I put my hazards on. I knew from everything my dad had ever told me, that I should not keep driving. But I was scared to pull over too, because if I went too far onto the shoulder I could go into the ditch, and in this visibility, no one would find me until the storm passed. I did manage to stop. I felt the car edge slightly to the right, felt the soft give that meant I was on the shoulder, and I put it in park. I turned on my hazards. I called 911. The dispatcher was calm, professional. She told me they were aware of conditions on Highway 16, that there were multiple vehicles in trouble across the region, that she was logging my location. She told me to stay in my car. She told me help would come when conditions allowed. She told me to run the engine for heat, but watch my exhaust pipe. A critical thing, because if snow packed around the exhaust you could get carbon monoxide buildup inside the vehicle. I told her I understood. I said I had a winter kit. She said good. She said she'd flag my location, and someone would check on me. Then the call dropped. I sat in my car in the white, and I waited. Underscore 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 underscore. The first hour wasn't too bad. I was scared, but the car was warm, I had food, I had my blanket. I tried my phone again, but I had no signal. I kept my hazards going. I thought about my dad's instructions. I got out once carefully to check my exhaust pipe. It was fine, and nearly got knocked over by the wind. I got back in and decided I wasn't getting out again unless I absolutely had to. The second hour was harder. The car was still running, but I was getting anxious about the gas. I had about half a tank when I'd pulled over, which should be plenty, but still, the anxiety was there. The visibility was still absolute zero. I couldn't even see the front of my own car through the windshield. Just white. Moving, swirling, relentless white. I started talking out loud to myself. Little things. You're okay, Claire. You're fine. The car is warm. Help is coming. The kind of quiet self-talk that isn't really about what you're saying. It's just about hearing a voice. And that's when I heard the other one. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a shout or a scream. It was almost the opposite. It was quiet, and that's what made me freeze. Because it came from outside the car. Outside, in that storm where nothing should have been. It said my name. Not hey, or hello, or even a scream for help. Just Claire. I actually laughed at first. A short, involuntary sound. Because that's how wrong it felt. There's no one out there, I told myself. That was the wind. The wind through the door seems make sound sometimes, everyone knows that. But I sat very still and I listened. Nothing for a moment. Just the roar of the storm. Then again, Claire. You need to move. I turned down the radio with a shaking hand. I pressed my face toward the window and squinted into the white. Nothing. Of course nothing. Visibility was zero. Hello? I said out loud, feeling slightly ridiculous. Is someone there? Silence. Then, and I swear to you this is exactly what happened. The road is gone under the snow. If you stay here you'll be buried. Walk. Straight ahead from your door. Count to 200. There's a farmhouse. I sat there for what felt like a long time. My brain was doing that thing it does when it's presented with something it can't file correctly. Just spinning, trying to categorize the input. My first thought was, this is hypothermia. Except I wasn't cold. My second thought was, I'm dreaming. Except I was very much awake. My third thought was, this is a person, a real person, stranded in the storm, trying to help me. That one felt almost believable. Almost. Because here's the thing. The voice didn't sound distressed. It didn't sound like someone fighting the wind to yell at me. It sounded close. It sounded calm. Calm in a way that felt wrong. That particular calmness that isn't peaceful, it's absent. Like something was saying the words without any of the feeling that should come with them. I thought about my dad's rules. Never leave your vehicle in a whiteout. Your car can be found. You cannot. I did not get out of the car. I can't, I said out loud to whoever or whatever was out there. I'm supposed to stay. Silence. Then Claire. Walk. The ditch ahead of you has a drop. You'll go in with the car if the plow comes through. Walk. 200 steps. And I felt something shift inside me. Not because I was convinced the voice was right, but because it had introduced a specific fear, the snowplow. Because that was real. That happened. Vehicles buried in drifts on the shoulder, plows coming through unable to see them. I had actually known about that. It was a real risk. And something about the voice knowing that, naming it, that was what finally got me out of the car. I grabbed my emergency kit. I put on every layer I had. I took my phone even though it had no signal. And I opened the car door. The wind hit me so hard I stumbled. It was disorienting in a way I can barely describe, because disorientation implies that you lose your sense of direction, but I had no sense of direction to lose. There was no up or down, no left or right, just this screaming white force pressing against every inch of me. I turned so that my back was to the car. I started walking forward. 1, 2, 3. I kept counting. I kept my face down, my chin tucked into my collar, one arm raised against the wind. I couldn't see anything. I focused on counting, on keeping my feet moving, on not falling. 50, 51, 52. I heard the voice again, somewhere ahead of me, or maybe to my left. The wind twisted sound in strange ways. It said, keep going, Claire. Keep going. And I kept going. 100. 101. I was crying by then. Not sobbing. I didn't have enough warmth to spare for that. Just tears leaking out because my eyes were squinting so hard against the wind, and because I was terrified. The thought had started to creep in. What if this is wrong? What if there's nothing ahead? What if I've just walked away from the only shelter I had, and I'm going to die out here in the white counting footsteps like a ritual? 150. 151. The voice came again. Closer. Almost there. 180. I walked into something. Not fell. Walked into it. My outstretched hand hit a solid surface, and I nearly collapsed from the relief. I ran my hands across it, would rough cold a wall. A building. I followed it with my hands until I found a corner, then followed the next wall, and there was a door. Old metal handle. I wrenched it open and fell inside. Underscore 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 underscore. It was a barn, old, drafty, but out of the wind. There were no animals. It hadn't been used in years by the look of it. There was old straw on the ground. The walls had gaps in the boards, but it blocked the wind enough. I pulled out my candles from the kit, lit 2 of them, wrapped myself in the blanket, and I sat there and shook for a while. I was alive. After maybe 20 minutes, the shaking started to ease, and I began to look around. In the far corner of the barn, there was a shape I hadn't noticed. I told myself it was just old equipment, hay bales, junk. Barns are full of junk. But the candle was throwing light in that direction, and the shape was wrong. The proportions were wrong. Too vertical, too narrow. I picked up the candle and walked toward it. It was a figure, standing upright, or what had been upright once. A person, or what had been a person. They had died standing against the wall, or they had been placed there, I couldn't tell, and the cold had preserved them in a way that is difficult to describe without sounding like I'm exaggerating. The face was still mostly intact, frost-covered, eyes closed. They were wearing old winter gear, the kind from maybe 20-30 years ago. A red snowmobile suit, faded and cracked with age. A toque pulled low, mittens still on the hands. There was something around their neck on a piece of twine. I got close enough to see it. It was a piece of paper inside a small plastic bag, the kind used to protect documents. On the paper, written in careful handwriting, were the words, "Lost in the storm of February 1994. If found, please call." And then a phone number with an old Saskatchewan area code. And a name. The name was Claire. Her name was Claire. Underscore 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 underscore. I don't know how long I stood there. I know the candles burned lower. I know at some point I backed away and sat down in the straw, and I did not look at that corner again. I did not sleep. Sometime, hours later, I have no idea how many, I heard an engine outside. Then voices. Then someone pulled open the barn door, and a flashlight swept across me, and a man in a highway patrol coat said, "Oh, thank God," and ran toward me. They had found my car first, buried in a drift on the shoulder. Empty, hazards still blinking. They'd swept the area. Found the barn. I told them there was someone in the corner. They found her. The man on the radio said, "Yeah, we're going to need the coroner out here." He said she had clearly been there for a very long time. He said it was an old barn on an abandoned farm property that the owners had moved away in the mid-90s. He said this kind of thing happened more often than people knew. People getting lost in Saskatchewan whiteouts, taking shelter, not making it. I asked him if he'd ever heard of a woman named Claire dying out here. He looked at me for a long moment. He said there had been a woman years back. A nurse, he thought. Lost during a bad storm in February of 1994. Never found officially because the family had moved away and the search hadn't been thorough. He said he was young when it happened, barely remembered it. He said her last name was Marchetti. Claire Marchetti. He said they'd found her car off the road about a kilometer back. That was in 1994. They'd assumed she'd walked for help and just disappeared into the storm. It happened. I told him she hadn't disappeared. She'd found the barn. She'd made it 200 steps from the road and found the barn and died inside it. He didn't ask me how I knew it was 200 steps. I didn't tell him. Underscore 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 underscore. There's an obvious explanation I've cycled through 1,000 times. I was scared, I was alone, my brain was under extreme stress, and it manufactured a voice from the ambient noise of the storm. A coping mechanism, auditory hallucination brought on by fear and isolation. The barn happened to be there, it was always there, and my subconscious latched onto it somehow. Maybe I'd driven that road enough times to have logged it without consciously knowing. That's the explanation that almost works. The one that doesn't, the voice knew my name. Not just my name, her name. The same name. The voice said Claire, And there was a dead woman in that barn whose name was Claire, who had made the same walk in the same storm on the same road 25 years earlier. Maybe she found the barn. Maybe she ran out of time before the storm passed. Maybe she died in there while knowing, with her last thoughts, that the barn had saved her from the worst of it, that if she'd stayed on the road she'd have been buried alive in her car, would never have been found. Maybe she died knowing she'd survived longer than she otherwise would have. And maybe, I know this sounds impossible, and I'm not asking you to believe it, maybe she remembered. Maybe she stayed. I don't know what I believe about what comes after this life. I really don't. I was raised in a household that was sort of loosely religious and sort of not, and I've never settled into any firm conviction one way or the other. But I know what I heard. I know the voice said my name before I got out of the car. I know it said 200 steps. I know I counted 200 steps and walked into a barn where a woman named Claire had done the same thing in 1994 and didn't survive long enough to be found. And I know that when I sat in that barn, waiting for dawn and shaking and too scared to look at the corner, I felt something settle, like a held breath releasing, like something that had been waiting for a very long time finally had a reason to stop. She was found in the end. Because of me. Her family was contacted, a nephew in Regina who hadn't known what happened to his aunt. There was a funeral, a small one. He thanked the police, and through the police, in a second-hand way that felt almost ceremonial, he thanked whoever had found the barn. I didn't go to the funeral. I wasn't sure I was ready to be in the same room with that story in an official way. I still don't know if I made the right call there. What I do know is this. I keep my winter kit in the trunk. Every November. Without fail. I think about my dad drilling that into me when I was 16. I think about how ordinary it felt at the time. Just a safety habit, just common sense. I think about how that ordinary habit might be the thing that kept me alive long enough to hear a voice in the storm that shouldn't have been there. And sometimes, when the wind is right and the night is cold and I'm in that half-sleep place on the edge of a dream, I hear it again. Very faint. Almost nothing. Keep going, Claire. I always do. Underscore 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 underscore. If you're ever driving in a prairie winter storm and the visibility drops, please pull over. Run the engine in intervals. Clear your exhaust pipe. Keep the kit. And if you hear something in the white that doesn't make sense, maybe don't ignore it. Stay safe out there.